Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask a few more questions about aquatic invasive species. As you know, I represent the Lake George area, and I've been in local government for many years. And certainly not only is this a Lake George issue, but it's also a statewide issue. And I certainly appreciate the spot that the Lake George Park Commission and DEC are both in. They each have their charges, and they're each trying to get their hands around the problem. And that also, as you know, certainly, Commissioner, it is both an environmental issue and it's an economic issue, certainly not only to the local economies, but also to the state economy. By purpose of background, in Lake George is owned by the state of New York, and but in the last few years, local government has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars of local taxpayer money in an eradication effort on Asian clam. And certainly I've put that up against the backdrop in the post-tax cap era and the unfunded mandates era that local governments have been struggling with both of those issues, and yet in the Warren County area, a lot of local dollars have been put into fighting invasive species on the state's lake. Now, with that said, I noticed that there's an increase in the EPF funding, and I believe that of the $19 million increase, is it correct to say that $12 million is geared towards future land acquisition? Or how much land acquisition?
The land acquisition line
increase?
goes up by $2.5 million.
$2.5 million.
Yep.
Does that include the funding that's needed for the process or the program that's in place for the current and future Finch land acquisition? Is that funded in the budget?
Well, that's a 5-year acquisition. So if the EPF were kept at these relative levels for 5 years, then we would have enough funding to complete that.
I know it's been in the press a lot, at least in my part of the state, but can you give us an idea on a timeline, both perhaps from a Lake George perspective or more importantly on a statewide perspective of what we're looking at for not only eradication in certain areas like the Asian clam Lake George, but the prevention and where we are with the process of
Sure.
of where to go long term here with a prevention plan?
Well, I'll start with the short term, if I could, Assemblyman. There's been a lot of concern on Lake George, rightly so. 5 different invasive species in the lake now, Asian clam and the spiny water flea being the 2 most recent. The Lake George Park Commission has a good head start on developing an environmental impact statement that looks at the possibility, actually it looks at several alternatives, but one alternative would be a mandatory boat washing program, as you know. They are going through a scoping process right now and should have that out on the street soon, and then they'll move forward with the EIS. But in the short term, we just announced, I think last week, that we were going to dedicate an additional $250,000 from the invasive species line of the EPF to enhance the steward program at the boat launches, which Lake George Park Commission has been operating, I think, for several years, so that and the stewards literally staff the boat launches. They inspect the boats. They advise the owners of the boats whether or not they think there's a problem. If they visibly see aquatic vegetation hanging from either the trail or the boat, they'll recommend a washing. And it's been very successful. They haven't had enough funds to put the staff on both in the early part of the season and in the tail end of the season after Labor Day. So the funds from the state will expand the length of time so that we catch most of the boats going in and out of the lake during the kind of the prime boating season. We're also committing increased patrols of both DEC and Lake George officers to patrol the lake, visit the launches also, and use enforcement authority if necessary if there are aquatic vegetation where a boat owner is ignoring the advice of the stewards and putting their boat in the lake. So that's the short term. Longer term, we hope to have the environmental review process complete this year, so that we know next year whether or not a mandatory boat washing, for example, is the right way to go in Lake George. And obviously, you mentioned that it has statewide implications. We're concerned about what implications there are if mandatory boat washing in Lake George goes into effect. Should it be employed at other lakes? And that obviously has resource considerations, to DEC and possibly others. So we want to take a very close look at it, but we will do whatever we need to do to slow down the spread of invasive species. I'm not, convinced that any one activity is the answer. Asian clams probably aren't spread through boats. There's lots of other ways Asian clams can spread, so you need to look at lots of different tools to address the issue. And I think the focus on Lake George is great, but I think what we learn there, I hope, is going to be applicable to lots of other places in the state.
And certainly I appreciate the complexity of the issue, and I know that a lot of time and energy has gone into this and a couple of the other issues that you've been talking about a lot this morning. I certainly, it seems like most of the important issues of the state get a lot of time dedicated to them, with the couple of notable exceptions that don't involve you or your department. But my concern would be, again, that time is not our ally here.
Yep.
2013, whatever the decision, whatever the results are for the study this year, we've got another growing season for these critters. Time is not our ally.
Right.
And I always like to, I'll circle back to land purchase. Certainly my position on land purchase in the Adirondacks anyways, the land's not going anywhere. It's not going to drag itself outside the blue line and develop itself. It's largely in environmentally friendly hands. There's not a landowner there that's looking to, typically in the cases of the land that's being looked at for purchase, time is less a critical variable in the land purchase area as opposed to the aquatic invasive species. So, whatever can be done to expedite this, and I'll use my freshman status here to say that, I'm new to all this, so appropriate or not appropriate, anything you could do in your budget to find a little more money for the aquatic invasive species eradication on Lake George. Again, to date, local governments have put more money into eradication than the state of New York has, and while we don't want to turn our nose up at $250,000. That's not enough, and I fully recognize that there are many, many other lakes, not only in my district, but certainly in the state of New York, and so I certainly encourage you and support you to get through the process as quickly as you can to figure out whatever the state process is, and I commend you in your efforts with the Lake George Park Commission on this effort, not only for my district, but certainly for the state. And thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblyman.